World building. It was a great game. It really was a great game. We had a ton of fun, the STs, and 20% of the player base. There was a ton of politics that ruined it, and a bunch of fucking dingbats that tried to ruin it. But the game ran a year. It was real good, and the reason that it was so good was not because we had some amazing fucking story. It was derivatives as fuck. She Who Shall Not Be Named wrote a lot of it, and it was shit. But we had a really good basis for the world, a really good, a solid idea of what mattered. And it was very, very simple. You had a map that everyone could reference, and we held to it. You had a resource, blood. That was the commodity. It was the economy when it really came down to it. It didn't matter if your vampires controlled all the politics and all the bureaucrats and all the brrr. No. What mattered is who controls the blood. Because you're a bunch of fucking vampires. And it didn't need to be simulationist.
I thought the story was okay.
The story was pretty good. The story was okay. I will say, Cameron and I were fucking, and Ben were STs.
Yeah, much more so than me.
The douchebag McFuckface who ran it did a little bit. Anyway, a little violent, yeah? Tremere Broken and Neckbeards are a real problem. Truth. Neckbeards who want to be vampire superheroes. Yeah, dude. Fuck all of those people. I will say that her problem was that, and this goes into a different conversation, but her problem when it really comes down to it, other than being a betraying son of a bitch, was she was an ST who wanted to be a player. That truly was it. She wanted to actually be a player in this LARP, but because of the LARP community, she had to be an ST. And
well, she also wrote the story.
She wrote some of the fucking story. What'd she write? She wrote the names
like 5 years.
She wrote the names. She wrote the names of the 3 elders, right? Which we played, or I played, half of them. The BBEGs, this guy. This is the story she wrote. I want 3 elders of certain that they're 1,000 years old. Hold on, they're 1,000 years old, and they're going to be of certain clans. But because they're 1,000 years old and they have different disciplines and whatnot, no one knows they're that clan, so everyone thinks they're other clans. Okay, cool. So the Gangrel, everyone thinks is a Ventru. Fine. The Maquette, everyone thinks is a Nosferatu. Fine. The Nosferatu, everyone thinks is a Maquette. That's what she fucking wrote. Like, by and large.
Anyways.
I will give her no credit where credit is not due. God damn it.
Let's get back to Deep Time.
Deep Time. Getting into that Deep Time. So, Deep Time, yet again, I will reiterate, since it's we're closing on this 15-minute mark. 3,000 years ago and prior. Sorry, 5,000 years ago and prior. So 3,000 BCE.
Yeah, people can define it however they want, but it generally...
Pre-recorded history.
Yeah.
That's Deep Time. Now, we've talked about how the geography can affect world building, by and large. And of course, the geography affects, where people live and how they live. If you live on a plain or near the forest or in the mountains, obviously that's going to change things. And then if you're dealing with a very long storyline for your world, like we do in DreadLore or Warhammer 40k or whatever, then you need to know how geography changes and all that good stuff. But let's get into the fauna, because that's one of the more interesting ideas, like terror birds and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so terror birds, to use that example, were the dominant predators of South America for quite a while, and they went extinct sometime after the biotic interchange with North America. They were likely driven into extinction by true cats and dogs.
Wait, really?
Yeah,
What was?
terror birds.
Okay, so terror birds.
But they're just one example of an animal that was actually real. There are South America by itself is. I mean, you could base a world in pre-interchange South America that would be almost unrecognizable to us in terms of the large animals that inhabit it.
Land Before Time shit. Well, actually, after that, really, but... So, when he says interchange, he's talking about North and South America touching.
But one of the things that I think would be interesting, and this has been touched on by people who do what's known as speculative evolution. This is actually a thing. People will take, say, animals that are around today, or go back in time and say, what would happen if, say, the dinosaurs didn't go extinct? What would happen? Where would that leave us today? But what they would do is they would take an animal that is either alive today or was alive in the past, and try and figure out how they would respond to different evolutionary pressures, and to see if you could come up with an animal that is, say, novel.
What does that mean?
So what would happen? What would happen? And some people have done this, but what would happen if you had, let's say there was another mass extinction, and the only real mammals that survived were rodents? What would happen if they became the dominant herbivores, and then other rodents became the dominant carnivores? What would it look like? In other words, you had rats that became these horrible predators, and plenty of storylines have done this. But then I had another set of rodents that became these really large herbivores. What would happen if you had a porcupine that just scaled up into something horrible? In other words, that was their means of defense. They were these herbivores that did not have competition from, say, horses or whatnot. What would happen if a porcupine could get as large as, say, a horse? And the animal trying to eat it was a giant rat with a taste for meat. In other words,
sounds like an anime. As in, like, sounds like a premise for an anime.
I mean, it probably is.
Well, I'm not saying like one that I'd heard. I'm saying, like, when you watch these anime that come out, or I don't really read manga very much, but when our collective buddy Austin will introduce me to a lot of anime, and it always dumbfounds me the level of depth that they've gone to the world building. And it's stuff like that. It'll be a premise very simple. They'll start with something like, well, what if, or Planet of the Apes style. What if,
Yeah, that's another example.
Some calamity happens that stilts humanity, and then apes gained intelligence, like ours. Okay, go. And you, just in a world building set, you don't have to like think about every little bits and pieces about like the stars and all this crap. You could just say, okay, we have our world and this thing happens. Go. I mean, that's what Fallout and all these things are. What is it with, like, it's not Fallout with a bottle caps, is it? Is it Fallout?
I'm not sure. I've never really seen.
Yeah, but there's one, maybe this, I can't remember. My geek is not strong when it comes to video games. But it's the one where you have bottle caps, and bottle caps are the currency. Because they're pieces of that hardened metal that you can't create anymore.
And they're scarce.
Yeah, just crap like that. I think it is, because I think it's called like something cola, Nuka-Cola or something.
It would make. I mean, I guess it would make sense in a way, because then they would be scarce, they'd be transportable, and they'd be divisible.
Yeah.
Or not.
Yeah. And that's the essence of world building, especially when you get into, so for instance, DreadLore. One of the things that Daniel had brought up were these massive, like, mammals and specifically terror birds. So Ben and I, we heard terror bird. We're like, hell yeah, I don't even know what that is. What is that?
They were these flightless birds that lived in South America, and in the absence of cats and dogs, although there were mammalian predators, they're called boar hyenids, and there was also one of them had independently evolved saber teeth.
Cool.
Yeah, although people aren't sure if they were used in the same way as
this isn't the one with like the weird molars, is it? They would like take a bite out of you and like let you bleed.
No, that's the what's known as the marsupial lion, and that was a wombat that developed a taste for meat in Australia, terrifying. Of course. No, the terror birds were these large flightless birds that had become adapted to running down large mammalian prey in South America, and they were probably, when they were alive, I mean, you can find a lot of stuff on YouTube about them, but they were horrible.
ROUSs, yes. I don't think they exist. Yeah, so terror birds were like really big fucking ostrich, like bigger than ostriches, right?
No,
or flamingos. I'm thinking of.
No, they were just some. Well, some ostriches, of them. They came in different sizes. Some of them were fairly slender and were obviously very swift, but others traded some of that for just being
brute force. Well, they had like this beak, and they just like hit you with it.
Yeah. That's the thought.
Like they had like just this massive beak, and they'd be like, and that was your ass. So we love that idea, and there's a place in the northeastern-ish part of Dahlun, which is the northern continent of DreadLore. We call the Warren, and it's just this one place where you can think of it kind of like it's volcanic. It's on the edge of, or it's in a basin. It's very dry and just kind of like tundra-y. And the weather is such to where nothing really grows there. And these terror birds roam free in hordes. So yeah, the nomadic tribes, the Warren rats as we call them, who go about there, they're very careful. Some of them ride the terror birds. And there's this whole society built around that. Yeah. And it's all from this idea of, hey, what about this prehistoric, bird? Fucking A. And then that develops all these things. You just sit them there and everything goes. Kind of like Smaug comes into the Lonely Mountain, everybody leaves. Cause and effect type stuff. Another one was this, what was it? It was a badger. It wasn't a honey badger. Or was it a beaver? I can't remember. It's like this giant. It's like 20, 30 feet tall. Huge motherfucker.
You're probably.
That's in my mind anyway.
That was most likely a giant ground sloth.
Ground sloth. Excuse me.
Yeah.
When you say giant,
some of them were probably approaching the weight of a modern elephant.
Murder turkeys. Let's catch up on this really quick. So if a porcupine has infinite food source, then it evolves differently. What does it become? So you were saying that you can use these what-if scenarios to build the animal life in the world. Yes. Yeah, man, I love doing that shit.
It wouldn't have been an infinite food source. It's just what would happen if they didn't have competition with larger animals, because rodents tend to be outcompeted at larger sizes with modern-day ungulates, which are modern-day hoofed animals. They tend to dominate the larger herbivorous niches, whereas rodents tend to be restricted towards the smaller end of the scale.
You say herbivorous?
Herbivorous.
Herbivorous. Oh,
herbivorous.
As in herbs. Okay.
Yeah, but if there were no large ungulates competing, ungulates, hoofed animals,
ungulates.
Yeah.
Ungulates.
These are your horses, your cows,
goats,
your deers, your goats.
Okay.
And your cetaceans, or your
What's a cetacean?
your whales. Yeah,
I did not know that whales used to have hooves.
They have been forced into adapting into an aquatic lifestyle because they are so well adapted. It has essentially erased any modern morphological, easily discernible characteristics. Yeah, they are. To give you an example, whales and dolphins and say deer are more closely related to each other than either are a horse.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah, and it was something that was only.
I'm just gold tonight.
It was something that was only really known. So I think some had suspected it beforehand, but it was something that was proven beyond a doubt when modern day genetics came about, and you could actually just sequence the genomes of these animals, and there it was. It was unmistakable.
Well, and you get into this idea too of so I'd referenced Avatar, and I don't mean The Last Airbender. I mean Avatar, like the Blue Cat People movie. One of the cool things about that movie, there are many cool things about that movie. It's got a bad rap in a lot of ways. I saw it. I really liked it. But the world is really cool. And apparently they put a lot of time into figuring out like why things are as big as they are, or why they have multiple legs. And the sort of flora and fauna relationship. It's obviously based off of what they know of Earth. Because, you have a puma that has like 27 legs, and you have a horse that has like 37 legs or whatever. But, it's still cool to like have that flavor, and it's not just random. Oh, yes, and it's a dragon. Like, where do dragons come from? I'm kind of tired of dragons just being the magic manifest, or the big reptiles. Like
Also, oftentimes when dragons are depicted, they are almost never depicted in a proportion that would allow them to fly if they were real.
Right.
If you look at some of the largest animals that have ever flown, which were the pterosaurs, they had those body shapes for a reason, and that is because you can't fly otherwise. There's a reason why really large, bulky animals almost never fly.
Now, did pterodactyls and stuff, did they have feathers?
They had something called pycnofibers. It was this hair-like projection, hair-like covering that might have been a version of very, very, very early feathers, but they never really developed them as feathers. They if they are related to feathers, then chances are it was something that was shared in common with the earliest dinosaurs, and some of the dinosaurs would go on to become birds, and those feathers would become something much more specialized. Pterosaurs actually, as you can easily see, used an elongated pinky and skin to sort of create a flight membrane.
But they probably couldn't fly very well, I'm assuming.
No, that it's thought that some of them could fly really well.
Really?
Yeah, and the way they did it was very, very different. It's thought that, at least I've read somewhere that they actually used their front legs to push themselves into the air. Yeah, but they were sort of at the very edge of what they could do physiologically in terms of flight, because they were just the later ones were just so huge. They were far larger than any bird, and they were more or less mostly winged. Because
it's interesting.
Yeah, and the dragons that you see depicted in fantasy, it's a story, so you can do whatever you want, but there's no way if they were on Earth that they could fly. No way.
So they'd have to be a lot more slender and that kind of stuff.
They would have to be,
or just gargantuan wings.
Gargantuan wings, or much, much lighter. So in other words, we would have wings that's. You think of a glider, that's probably what we would need. A small glider that you see people flying around in or gliding around in, that's probably approaching what we would need just to actually fly.
Well, and this is one of the other things. Obviously, it's fantasy. You don't have to figure out everything. Like, for instance, Star Trek wouldn't work if they were like, well, technically we can't go past the speed of light, so fuck, right?
Yeah,
you've got to figure that out. You can bend the rules, you can break the fucking rules, but there needs to be a reason. So maybe dragons can fly because there's an element of magic. Fine, or maybe they're half elemental and therefore, or maybe it's kind of like in Planescape where they believe they can.
I think it would be cool if dragons are magical. Take away their wings. They don't need wings.
That's true, but
just let it cool. But I think it would be cooler if to say to have dragons.
Well, Chinese dragons don't have wings.
Yeah,
they just fly, and in a way, and they have 5, 7, and 9 legs. I think just weird shit, which is cool. For instance, wings become a primary motion, and their back legs are there to hold you still. It has been disregarded. Anyway, so we're pretty much about to close down on the stream. Do you have any things to tie this up? Maybe we're going to go with it, or
I would also I want to throw out if you're really into the map making part, there is a free tool called QGIS.
QGIS, I will.
Yeah.
I'll reference all of these things as well.
It is. It's a free tool that you can use to make maps. If you wanted to make maps, you can import data from various sources. You can also probably use it to make completely new worlds if you wanted to. GoogleEarth is another good one if you're basing it on parts of the Earth, or actually basing it on a part of our world. You can find information. You can find information that you can import there.
Photoshop.
Yeah, Photoshop.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that just sort of a prelude to some of the other conversations that I'm going to have. Cameron and I are going to do a conversation probably via live streaming that deals with the maps of DreadLore and setting certain things up. We have most of the land masses and whatnot, but filling out the bits and pieces and the conversations of, well, if you put a river valley there, what does that mean? That probably means that people have lived there, right? Because it's water, and we can get into, when it comes to game talk, a little bit more of the world of DreadLore. You should be there for it. That way you can kind of...
That'll be in the comments.
Consult. Yeah, that'd be kind of cool. All right, as far as the first dinosaurs known with feathers. Archaeopteryx.
Archaeopteryx was a proto bird, very primitive bird that was found in 1859. It possessed a mosaic of features that you would find in dinosaurs and birds. So in other words, you had an animal that could fly, but not as well as modern birds, but it had a jaw full of teeth. It had claws on its hand, and it had a much longer tail. And
Archaeopteryx.
Yeah, it's one of the most.
I've seen the fossil.
Yeah, it's one of the most famous ones before.
Yeah.
And Megan also had another comment about did the first dinosaurs have feathers? From what I've read, not feathers that we would think of flight feathers. Although I don't think they've ruled out that. I think it's possible that they might have had some sort of primitive down covering, but that's.
It's kind of hard to know unless it's preserved.
It is kind of hard. It is kind of hard to know. What a lot of times what they'll do is they'll infer characteristics from a common ancestor. So if you have an animal on one lineage that crops up with a certain feature, and then you have another one that shows up as well. You can, with the same feature, and you have really good reason to think that they did not evolve independently, then you can, by reference, state that the last common ancestor of those two fossils likely possess the same characteristic. So, if there is a relationship between the pterosaur covering and feathers, then yeah, the first dinosaurs would have that, or would be covered in those. I guess what you would call them, but I think it's not a foregone conclusion either way. It's just something that's won't be known until more information is uncovered, or more fossils are uncovered.
So, Cameron had mentioned Inkamate, which I don't know if it's a. Do you have to pay for that program, or is it free? I will post all these sources in the details once I, upload this video and all that good stuff. Everyone, thanks for coming. Holker, thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Throwing down some deep time, world building conversation, etc., etc. The next discussions will be on Sunday, right about 7 o'clock Eastern Standard. I'll post on Instagram, Something Bunkum, on Twitter, Something Bunkum. And yeah, please join again. Type. Have people subscribe. Dear God, I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. All right. See you guys.
Thank you. Good night.
Good evening.